Amy McCrory, I'm head of digital imaging in the preservation and reformatting department in the libraries. The facility I work in is actually not Thompson Library. It's called the Library Tech Center. It's a little one-story building out on West Campus. How many people know where West Campus? Okay, good. How many people know where Kinnear Road is? All right, come on by anytime. We're at 1165 Kinnear Road. It's a locked building, but we have a doorbell. Being on West Campus is somewhat of a disadvantage because we don't have very immediate access to the library's collections, which is what we photograph. On the other hand, we get a lot more space out there than we ever would have in the renovated Thompson Library. So in a lot of ways, it's a good workspace for us. We serve primarily the university libraries, so any work we do is either going to be scanning or photographing items from the library's collections or working on a project sponsored by a librarian, perhaps in cooperation with faculty. So we're not a walk-in service center, and we don't do photography for just everybody. It's primarily library-based. Although, as I say, the librarians frequently do partner with people doing research or cultural heritage projects. I'm going to skip the scanning part today because that's a whole thing in and of itself, and I'm just going to concentrate on the photography. We do primarily work with rare books, manuscripts, artwork, artifacts, and that covers a lot of ground, as you'll see. My concentration is in cultural heritage photography. And I can work either with tethered shooting on a copy stand or take the camera off the copy stand and walk around doing 3D shooting, and I'll show some examples of both. Here's the copy stand. So it's a typical setup if you've done copy photography. We've got the camera fixed and square over whatever item is sitting on the table, and then over to the right you see the computer. The camera feeds the images directly to the computer. We can do up to 22 by 29 inch drawings, maps, artwork, manuscript pages, flat work on the table. We also have a book cradle for old books that can't be done on a standard scanner, either because they're extremely fragile, valuable, or because they're so-called springy books. The bindings are so tight they won't lie flat. And in those cases, we use a book cradle to hold up one side with a strip of Velcro, fire the camera from the computer, snap a picture, take off the Velcro, turn the page, fasten the page back, do the next page. So obviously a very slow process. Our rapid book scanning is a completely different thing. I'm also going to point out the lighting. There's one of the electronic flashes we use. It's got a big diffuser box over it. There's another one directly opposite it on the other side of the table. That's because for each page or item we shoot, we're trying to get very even, balanced lighting with a linear profile, so a very neutral presentation of the subject. We're not doing any bumping up the contrast or color. We're trying to show the historic artifact exactly as it is. So we do books like this book from this Bible from Renaissance era, more modern books. This is late 19th century book cover. I know it says 1920, but this was published in 1895, so I guess it's like speculative fiction. We do medieval and Renaissance manuscripts, maps, lots of maps, graduation photos from a long time ago, because those tend to be really large. We've had, I think, 3 different schools on campus send them to us for copy photography. Paintings, architectural plans. This is, I think, from the mid-19th century in Japan from a naval academy. Legal documents, back when legal documents looked like this. Theater costume designs, matchbooks. This was done from the personal collection of a book artist. She ended up using this image as the end papers for her book. Anyone who's lived in Columbus for a long time, there's a lot to enjoy here. Daguerreotypes. The Rare Books and Manuscripts Library in Thompson has a large collection of daguerreotypes, tintypes, and ambrotypes. So these are 19th century photos exposed and developed and fixed onto a metal plate instead of exposed onto film and then developed on paper. With objects like this, we try to do every aspect of the artifact. So we've got the little hinged case with the velvet pad the photos were kept in, and then our conservator, who works next door to digital imaging, was able to take the plates out of the cases so we could get details of the surface of the plates and the deterioration caused by the cheap metal mats that were put around them, and just by the fact that daguerreotypes are kind of a very active sort of substance that doesn't age well. That's why they're kept in cold storage. So as I mentioned, for most of these things, we're using very neutral lighting, very even, flat lighting. But sometimes we need to do something a little special, like throwing in these speed lights that are pointed directly at the piece. And that's because with some items, like illuminated manuscripts that include gold leaf, we really want to get that sparkle and show it's gold leaf. If we were using even lighting, all the gold would look brown and flat. It wouldn't read as what the physical thing actually is. Our mission is to get all the details of artifacts out to researchers who can't or aren't going to come here to see the originals in the Rare Books Library. So we try to have as much detail and evidence as we can in the shot. Occasionally I use a macro lens. For smaller pieces, we actually use macro for all but the largest daguerreotypes. It really comes in handy with little manuscripts like this one, which is only about 3 by 4.5 or 5 inches. There's a lot of fine handwriting and detailed illustrations. And we want researchers, when they look at these online, to be able to zoom in and actually see what's going on the page. We had this tiny prayer book. We also did this with a macro lens, just for scale. I have one of my assistants hold it. You can see it's a springy book. He's really having to press just to keep the thing open. We were able to do this on the book cradle, which, just as a reminder, typically has something like this on it. This next thing is an overhead shot of the little book with the Velcro holding it back, and another one of my assistants holding 2 little sticks to keep the page down. And in that way, we're actually able to get a fairly flat shot of the page. Normally, we use little metal instruments from the conservation department called micro spatulas, but those are metal. And we were getting so much glare off the micro spatulas, it was interfering with the content on the page. So we got a couple long Q-tips and had one of the conservators use a stable, non-reactive black dye to just make those flat. We don't ever try to edit that kind of thing out of the picture. We're very much about just showing evidence that this is the handling it needed to be digitized, because that also tells you springy book. So that's the overhead copy stand stuff. I also do some 3D imaging. Of course, in reality, everything's 3D, but you know what I mean. I take it off the column it's mounted on, hand hold it, and take pictures of things from the collections. If you haven't gotten the idea already, the libraries at OSU include just an unbelievable array of objects from all different eras. I don't know how well known that is on campus, and I always like to encourage people to visit the library and see some of the special collections if you haven't before. This is the sun compass that Admiral Richard Byrd had in his airplane when he flew over the poles, because you can't use a magnetic compass when you're navigating over the poles, so he had this instead. That was a lot of fun to photograph. This is a cross-section of a 340-year-old tree, and here you see the glamorous life of the cultural heritage imaging specialist. That's really how I did it, because I work in a small room and we just have to move equipment around a lot and improvise. This tree was finally felled in a lightning storm, so somebody sawed out a cross section of it and then put a lot of varnish on it, so the lighting was tricky, so we didn't just have glare hitting the thing. Here's another instance of glare. The library owns 8 sections of plaster wall from a house James Thurber lived in, and being James Thurber, of course, he went up to the attic and drew on the wall with crayon and pencil. So they paid a conservator a lot of money to pry those away without crumbling them. And then, unfortunately, before I photographed them, they had them framed in shadow boxes under plexiglass. But we set up the lighting so that we could just do this without glare and get an even image of it. This is an artist book. It's a 10-foot scroll in a bottle. That's what the scroll looks like. Some seals from legal documents. These were done with the macro lens. In real life, they're about that big. And film cases. We have a lot of AV collections. These, I think, are from the OSU Extension Service. The films themselves are artifacts, so are the film cases. So, you know, we took a picture of those. We also do a lot of photographing the book as a 3D object. So this is one of the Bibles from the Rare Books and Manuscripts collection. Another Bible with some metal fittings that made it pretty interesting. 19th century books, not all that remarkable looking, but they do show you what books looked like in the 19th century. These are Charlotte Bronte's books that she wrote under the pseudonym Currer Bell, so she could get them published. A book binding with a picture of Martin Luther. That was in a recent exhibit in the Thompson Library Gallery. A little prayer book with fabric and embroidery. And this book, which to me is remarkable, the pages are parchment, the binding is parchment, they got the leather. It's like, it's not really pretty, but it's so interesting. Somebody really wanted to put a book together with a lot of pages, and by golly, they managed it. And it's survived to this day, which is remarkable on its own. I am trying to remember. I think that's either 16th or 15th century. I should have put the date on this. It's a 400, 500 years old. Are there any questions at this point before I dive into the workflow? Yes?
That may be a weird question, but if there's glare going on, is it always possible to get rid of that glare by adding lighting in different locations?
Theoretically, yeah. And with big frame pieces, which we get, something's framed under glass, and I say, can we take the frame off? No. Okay. I just take the Profoto lights with the 3-foot-long diffuser boxes and put them way out to the sides and just keep moving them. And I have the student there with the color target till we figure out that the lighting is even all the way across the piece without the glare starting to intrude. And the trade-off is getting some shadow off the sides of the frame, but you can usually reduce that. I could also set up black cards or gobos to block light at various angles. I've done that a few times, but usually I try to just have the lights themselves do it so everything doesn't get too complicated. So photography workflow. Here's a little gray room I work in. We got, once again, the copy stand. We got some lights off to the sides. We got the computer the camera's tethered to here, and dual monitors set up. The left monitor has, that's just a closer view so you can see the monitors. The left monitor has thumbnails, which can be resized of all the pictures. And then the right-hand monitor has a close-up view of the selected photo. You can see on the screen there. And here, if I do need to do any adjustments to tone or color or cropping or de-skewing after photography, then it's just easier to zoom in here and do it. So the first monitor is a ViewSonic, which is not top of the line, but it's good. And I have it calibrated for an sRGB color space because that gives me a good preview of what things will look like on the web. And then the other monitor is an ISO. That's our nice monitor with a Adobe RGB color space and white balanced for photography. That usually gives me the better preview of what something's going to look like when it's printed. And I know there shouldn't be any difference between screen and print, but in the real world, there are always at least subtle differences. Both monitors are calibrated with the same device. I use the software that comes with the device for the ViewSonic, but the ISO has its own color navigator software that doesn't want anything else calibrating that monitor, so we use that. So Capture One software. It's a lot like Adobe Lightroom. It processes raw images. You can make lots of edits there. You can use it with phase one, as was mentioned, but also your Nikon, Canon, Hasselblad, Sony, and other models can be used with it as well. You can shoot tethered, as I usually do, or you can shoot to a card and then import the images later. Yes. Yeah, you can do wireless. My camera, in particular, the body and digital back on the camera I have now is old. So we actually can't take advantage of live view, which is terrible because live view makes everything so much easier. And we don't have wireless right now, so we have cords everywhere. But yeah, if you have a newer camera, you can take advantage of both of those things with Capture One. They're always upgrading. I think they're up to a version 11 now, is the most recent.
Lightroom does have it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the two are very similar in the kinds of things you can do. The way my workflow looks is there's the setup of all the equipment and the object and figuring out how to get the lighting right, and then some test shots, and then looking at the test shots, seeing everything that's wrong, making adjustments, and using those adjustments to build a shooting profile for the actual project, then taking lots of pictures, then finally the editing and processing. So this is typically what it looks like. First I shoot a color checker target, and this is the capture panel. There's the button you click to fire the camera. It records everything about the camera and lens you're using. You can make adjustments up front, more about that in a minute. You can set up a naming convention so you get the same base name for every file and just let the camera auto-sequence from there. So I shoot the target, have a look at that, and examining it here, I can see that there's a blue color cast. Not only that, it's not on this screen, but if the mouse were hovering over one of the gray patches, there would be red, green, blue channel readouts and a luminance channel readout up top that would show me whether those numbers are all even, as they should be on a neutral gray patch, or whether there's a color shift, as there appears to be. So then using the white balance slider, I can adjust it so we actually have the correct color readout. And then I can use this copy arrow to save that. And I can save any other settings that I want to have sort of baked in from the beginning and copy them all to what Capture One calls a style. I would call it a profile, but that's okay. So any settings you have in the target you just shot, you can check the boxes for those and then save. You can even pre-crop the images. If you know every piece you're shooting is going to be the same size and you've got the table marked so everything's in the same place, you can save some time there.
How much variation do you have from shoot to shoot? I mean, I know you're moving the lights around, but the lights are at a specified color temperature, right?
Yes.
But is it the camera having slight variations, or the setup, or what?
Yeah, or the lens. I'd say it's a combination of things, and then sometimes you get those weird objects that reflect light in a way you didn't expect. Especially with artwork, you can get greens and things that don't read quite right. But in general, yeah, I should be getting the same readout on that neutral patch every time, and I usually do. Now, if I start using mixed light, or I use lights or reflectors that are different from the ones I normally use, then I have to white balance to compensate for the different lights I'm using.
Do you keep it on the studio setting, your white balance, like the actual camera settings? Or do you have custom settings? I mean, this is like fascinating. I'd be interested to see how you manage it in camera as well. Yeah.
You can just say, okay, everything's going to be white balanced at 5500, or you can say, I see little variations here, so I'm going to save all this, and then with each shot the camera takes, that information is written to the camera's digital back, and it's incorporated into the shot. So like, you can shoot a lot of images and then go, everything looks blue, and select all the images and apply a white balance to all of them after having taken the pictures. Or you can use the target and you can anticipate any aberrations and build them into each shot. So you've eliminated that part of the post-processing work. You can do that with lens aberrations too, which I think a lot of people find useful if you're switching out lens a lot and they have different weaknesses or color shifts. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
For most jobs, I use the same settings and everything's fine, but it's always good to check first. So then once you've done that, returning to the shooting screen, this is all covered up because I had the pop-up menus come up. But choosing your ICC profile, orientation, any metadata you want to build in, you can build that into the shots beforehand, which is cool. And then there's a choice for all other, and that's where you can bring up your user styles or the manufacturer's preset styles and choose one. And that's going to be your style for all the shots. I should add that Capture One collects a lot of information about lenses and what sort of problems, known issues lenses from various manufacturers have. And so they have these corrections for all of them. You can just select. You don't even have to do that yourself. So
it automatically adjusts barrel distortion.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so as with everything, the setup is always the longest part, right? So after I've spent all that time on it, then I take the pictures. And once the pictures are all taken, I go to the processing tab and prepare this for a batch output, assuming all images are going to have the same output settings, which is what I try for. So you can embed your color profile here, pick the resolution. If you're going to distort the scale, you can. I almost never do. Everything's at 100% of the original because this is representative historical photography. If you decide you want to rename your images at that point, you can do a batch rename on output. And what else? That's it. Oh yeah, bit depth. You can choose your bit depth at that point. And then select every image, process, and generate a batch of TIFFs or JPEGs or whatever it is you're using. And I think that's the last slide. Yes. So limitations to my setup. As I mentioned, I got my camera in 2009, and it was actually refurbished digital back at the time. So much has happened since 2009 that unfortunately I'm not able to take advantage of. For instance, with the smaller daguerreotypes, I used a macro lens. It had to be manually focused. When I manually focus on the camera up on the copy stand, I can't use the live view and do focusing on screen, which you could do with a newer camera. So I still have to climb up on a ladder, look down through the camera. Yeah, I'm still doing that. The manufacturer, Phase One, did loan me one of their newer cameras, technical cameras for copy stand work, and I got to try out live view and focusing on screen, and it was amazing. So now I just have to convince my department to buy the new Phase One. I'll be climbing that ladder for a while.
Yeah.
I've been hearing from a lot of cultural heritage photographers that like the full frame Nikons and Canons and Sonys are catching up to medium format in a lot of areas, particularly in detail. They still don't have the same dynamic range, and I hang on to that because I need it for this kind of thing. But yeah, they're catching up fast, and I've considered trying to, okay, ideally I'd get the newer medium format and have an SLR and be able to switch them out for various things. But I know a lot of photographers who are either doing that or saying, hey, I work at a small museum, I'm getting the Nikon, you know, I can still get great work done that way.
Where do these all go when you're done? Are they, what kind of public access?
Some of them go to the digital collections system hosted by the library. It is called the DC. I think you can get to it from the library's main page. So they host and share the images, and what makes me very happy is in the past year they put in an excellent zooming function, so you can zoom in and see all this detail that I'm capturing. There's also the Knowledge Bank, which is our institutional repository. So they keep a lot of the history of the university, faculty papers and things, but they also have some highly visual digital collections. They were established in 2004, and they were handling all visual collections until the DC took that over. But they have that whole backlog of everything that was done up to that point. Marilyn's here from Billy Ireland Cartoon Library. They have, I guess your images are in the DC now that I think of it. Yeah. That's just one of many reasons you should go to the DC. Billy Ireland generates images with a large format scanning back camera, which are amazing. And then some things are still hosted by like outside vendors. That would include the Lantern, going back to 1881, the Alumni Magazine, going back to 1909, and a literary newspaper called The Capital. And pretty soon we're going to be adding a newspaper from the Black Student Union from the late 60s to the mid 70s. That'll be coming up a couple months from now. I think Archives plans to just keep sending us university-based newspapers and magazines. We're going to keep adding those to a site hosted by Olive Software, and you can get to that via a link from the University Archives page. Yes.
How much, so, you know, you log into this portal, how much information is there about each, like to know what each one of those pictures, for instance, is?
The DC and the Knowledge Bank provide a certain amount of metadata. I think the DC has more public metadata in a easily readable format. So they're going to give you the title if there's a title, author if there's an author. If the subject is known, they have the subject. Most of these are anonymous, but we got like John Wilkes Booth over there on the end, and we've got one of Walt Whitman. Most of them are anonymous. A date or an estimated date if they're not really sure of it. The format, the size. There'll even be information about like the format of the digital object and how it was taken, like whether it's a TIFF, what the bit depth and resolution are, the color
Just
profile.
like why we have it, who gave it to us, what the significance of it is.
For that, you get a tie-in to a collection of which these are a part. And the collections are described through things traditionally called finding aids. I would call them collection guides. They have the name of the person who created the collection, when they created it, why they did it, what the context for all this is. I know they're trying to get in links between the digital image collection and the finding aid collections, also hosted by the libraries. I'm not sure those links are in place yet. But if we could pull all that together, and you could read the description of the collection and then go, oh, I want to see the images from box 3, and just click that and then link to the digital collection. That's the goal. Yes?
What kind of funds do you need to stop climbing the ladder?
$50,000.
How much?
$50,000. That's for the technical camera.
Okay, people, open your wallets.
There we go. So I'll be passing the hat.
Have a bake sale.
Yeah, that might be a good idea.
What's the copyright on these? Can we use them in things for OSU, like videos? Can the public use them? What's the?
It depends. These are all out of copyright because they're 19th century.
Right.
When we're asked to scan a book or a document that's pre-1923, we always say, yeah, we can do that. If it's post-1923, then we go, well, we'll have to talk to our copyright specialist, see if we know who owns the rights, see if there's a fair use case for sharing it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that Marilyn, I hate to put you on the spot, but the digital collections, are those limited to copyright-free stuff? They're not. That's right, yeah. Yeah.
What we believe is either
Yeah.
copyright
Yeah. That's another thing. A lot of times the rights status isn't known. So if you remember using the photocopier at your public library, and there would always be a sign up that said, under section 108 of copyright law, you can make a copy for personal use, but don't sell it and don't send it around to everybody. It's that kind of thing. Yeah, we advise the user. We can't always know exactly what the rights are, though. All right. Any final questions? Okay. Yes.
Are there digital backs available for really old SLRs?
For really old SLRs?
35 millimeter? I don't know. I am not sure.
This is not relevant to your question really, but I do remember seeing a web page where somebody took a Holga camera and put a Phase 1 digital back on it. So yes, that should be possible for anything.
I get my K1000 with a digital back and tax K1000.
Why not? I wish I had brought links to the library collections to share with you all, but I didn't. So you can start with the library homepage, or I can email something out with links to collections if that would be of interest. All right, thank you.